Once people buy an SLR camera, at some point they want to go out and buy additional lenses for it. Now, assuming they know if they want a wide angle or a telephoto lens, they might decide they need a zoom lens or a prime lens, or they might need a lens that can open its aperture to 2.8 or f4. And based upon these different criteria, they might make a choice as to at least which range of lenses they're talking about. That's where MTF charts can be useful. Now, it should be said that MTF charts, which we're going to discuss in a second, should only be compared within a manufacturer. So, for example, if you have a clear vision in your mind that you're going to go out and buy a Canon lens, then it's important to just compare Canon charts amongst Canon lenses as opposed to going out and finding a MTF chart for a Tamron lens or for a Nikon lens and then comparing those side by side. Due to the different criteria used by different manufacturers in creating these charts, it really doesn't make sense to compare outside of manufacturers. It also should be noted that if you're trying to decide between different wide-angle lenses or different telephoto lenses and you're pretty close on the exact focal length that you want to buy, then again, that's a great time to start thinking about MTF charts. But if you're comparing something like a 50mm lens versus a 200mm lens, then again, the charts really aren't too useful for head-to-head comparisons. So I've got here in my hand the 17 to 40mm Canon zoom lens, and I've got the web page pulled up on the Canon website for this particular lens. And when you find the appropriate link on the website, you'll want to just scroll down and look for the MTF charts. Now, not all manufacturers are going to publish these for all their lenses, but for many of the lenses available for sale these days, you can find these charts. In this case, we've got two charts. We've got the wide-angle chart and the telephoto chart because this lens is a zoom lens. Assuming the wide-angle lens, the wide-angle chart here represents the 17mm portion of this lens, let's go ahead and take a look at that. I'm going to zoom in here a bit. And you'll notice that this chart is really composed of two basic components. You've got the horizontal scale and the vertical scale. And starting here on the left with the vertical scale, this represents, we see 0 through 1, and we've got decimal values of 0.1 through 0.9 in between. This represents percentage values of that lens's ability to render contrast effectively. So when we talk about numbers in the 0.8 to 1 range, when we talk about anything in that area, we're talking about a really superior lens when it comes to dealing with contrast and micro contrast. When we speak about a lens that's performing in the 0.6 to 1 area, then we're talking about still a good lens, but anything below 0.6 is a little bit suspect. All right, we'll get to all these squiggly lines in a bit. But now coming down here to the bottom, this scale represents in millimeters the distance out from the center of the lens. So we're talking about at 0 here on the left, we're talking about the lens's ability to perform at the middle of the lens or the middle of the frame as you take your rectangular photo and look at it, and then going outwards towards the edge of that frame or the edge of the lens is what we're seeing out here at the 20mm side of things. So this represents a full frame 35mm camera. So just remember that the larger the number down here, the further out towards the edge of the frame we're talking about. It's at the edges or the extremities is where most lenses are going to have the most difficulty performing well on this chart. All right, so let's get to the lines now. When it comes to the thick lines that you're seeing here with the blue and the black, this is the most important thing you're going to find on the chart. This really represents the lens's ability to render micro contrast. And we're not talking in this case about the contrast that we're thinking about in terms of printing an image, say, for example, high contrast black and white photographs. We're talking about the lens's ability to differentiate light from dark areas, and ultimately its ability to perform in delivering you nice, rich micro contrast. So the thick black line represents this lens's ability to perform wide open. So in this case, that's f4. That's as wide as this lens can go. In other lenses, it might be f2 or f2.8, but we're wide open here. And the blue line, the thick line up here that's blue, that represents f8. So basically stopped down halfway. And so why two lines? Well, some photographers are going to be only concerned with how the lens performs at the low end of the f-stop spectrum, because most of their work is going to be maybe for portraitures or for low light conditions where they're constantly using a wide open setting or close to it. Whereas other photographers might not be so concerned with those settings. Maybe they're only going to be shooting at f8 or above if they're a landscape photographer who shoots mostly in the daytime. Maybe they're not so concerned with how well the lens performs wide open. So they've given you both. And as a result, you're going to consistently see that the blue is going to outperform the black in most every case, just because lenses are going to perform better when they're stopped down further. But in this particular example, we've got a lens that's fairly close in both respects, both wide open and stopped down to f8. It's performing fairly well here at the top. In fact, it's performing very well at the center of the frame. Then out towards the edges, this is where both lines drop off significantly. And this is, you can see as we get out towards between 15 and 20, there's a huge fall off there at the edges of the frame, which are not going to be rendered nearly as sharply and distinctly as what we have at the center. So our micro contrast going way down here at the edges. All right, now as far as these other lines are concerned, you'll notice there's a thin, looks almost like a gray line, or it's a thin black line, and a thin blue line as well. This represents the lens's ability to effectively create resolution on the image. And this concept of resolution and contrast go hand in hand, and that's something that basically these two things are really inseparable. But for most people's interest, they're really going to focus on the thick lines. These are the lines that represent, once again, contrast. And for most people's concerns, that's what they're most interested in. But you can measure both. The dotted lines that coincide with whatever line you're reading, so in this case, that would be this thick dotted line if we're reading this thick black line, the solid black line. The dotted line here is going to give you some sense of the quality of the out of focus areas on the image. So what does that mean? Well, if you think about the point of focus, if you think about depth of field, if we're focused on a subject, then this line here is going to represent the contrast on the focused subject or the focused item. This dotted line is going to represent what happens to the out of focus areas. So the closer these two lines are together, the more in sync they are, then the better that lens is going to be at rendering the out of focus areas. So the quality of the soft focus is going to be better than it will be if these diverge significantly from each other. So in this case, we're not seeing a great deal of correspondence there, and in this case, at least at the wide angle level, this lens is not going to give us the best quality when it comes to soft focus. Now coming over to the telephoto side, let me just zoom out here a little bit and readjust. The lens is performing much better at the telephoto side, so we can assume in this case that we're dealing, once again, with a 17 to 40 millimeter. We're here now at the 40 millimeter side of the spectrum. And our performance has increased dramatically. Now at the 20 millimeter side over here at the edge of the frame, we're getting much better readings than we saw over here where it dipped off significantly. So any lens that can stay at 80% or above, or 0.8 to 1 here in this range, is a extremely high quality lens when we're talking about these thick solid lines. Any lens that goes above 0.6 or 60% is still a very good quality, not quite as good. Anything below that is a bit lacking. And if you can just take away those basic points from these charts, I think you'll be on your way towards deciding on the right lens for you.